Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're really getting into some fascinating material you've brought, tackling a pretty huge question, actually.
Where do our thoughts even come from?
Exactly. This deep dive is all about exploring the source, the nature of thinking itself. We'll look at, different origins and that very first flicker of a thought coming into consciousness.
Right. And the mission, really, is to pull out the key ideas from this material.
Yeah, hopefully helping you see your own internal world a bit differently.
Yeah.
It offers a perspective that, well, it challenges how we usually think about that constant stream of thoughts, worries, ideas.
All that mental traffic.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. The material starts by making a pretty clear distinction.
It does. It says, look, not all thoughts are the same. They don't all come from the same place.
Okay, so what are the categories?
Well, it lays out two main sources. The first one, and this is probably the one we experience most often, is what it terms external sources.
External sources. So you mean like thinking about groceries or work deadlines
Or, wow, it's raining. Exactly. These are the thoughts directly tied to what's happening around you, your immediate environment, your activities.
So the vast majority of day-to-day thinking.
Uh-huh. Most of what runs through our head is reacting to or generated by what we're doing, work, family, chores, something we just read or heard.
The conversation we're having right now.
Precisely. And the sources describe these thoughts as often, fleeting. Countless, really, through the day.
And these are the ones that show up in dreams, too. The material mentioned daytime thoughts.
Yes, like the residue of our waking life being processed. It's very much an outside-in flow.
Stimulus from the world, thought in response, reactive, makes sense.
Right. But then, and this is where it gets, I think, really profound, the material introduces the second source, internal sources.
Okay, so these don't come from what's happening outside.
Correct. They seem to bubble up from somewhere much deeper inside, not a reaction, but an origination.
And this is where that term Ruach HaKodesh fits in.
Yes, the sources bring that up, often translated Holy Spirit, but in this context, it seems to point towards a thought that feels, well, different, maybe sacred, separate from a hidden or higher, purely internal place.
An inside-out kind of thought.
Exactly, coming from the depths of your own being, separate from all the external noise. And interestingly, the material suggests there are different levels, different depths to this internal source. It's not all one thing.
Okay, so if we want to tap into that deeper source, this internal wellspring, how do we do it according to this material?
Well, that leads us to a really central concept here. Aim, spelled Aleph, Yud, Nun.
Aim.
And the material presents this really interesting take on a verse from Job, and wisdom, where is it found? V'chokma mi'ein timatze.
Okay.
It suggests reading it not just as a question, but as the answer itself. Wisdom is found from I, me-in.
From ayin.
Yeah.
Which literally means nothing, nothingness.
It does, but the key insight here isn't that wisdom comes from, a vacuum, a total negative void.
Right, that sounds a bit bleak.
Instead, the material frames ain here as a necessary void, a kind of productive emptiness, a hollow space you create.
Like, how? Give me an analogy.
Okay, think about building. You don't just start placing bricks on the grass, right?
No, you dig first.
You dig first. You create that hole, that hollow space before you pour the foundation. That initial emptiness is crucial for the structure that comes later. Ain is like that essential void.
Okay, I get the analogy.
Yeah.
So how do we dig that hole in our minds to access this internal wisdom?
The practical advice given is that you need to learn how to hollow out or empty the mind. The Hebrew phrase used is leshalel et mocho.
Hollow out the mind.
Yeah. And there's another analogy used, a baking mold.
Okay.
If it's already full of yesterday's cake crumbs, you can't pour new batter in effectively, right? It needs to be empty.
So clear out the mental clutter to make space for these deeper internal ideas.
Exactly. If the mind is constantly full, racing with those external source thoughts, there's no room for anything new from this deeper place to really land.
That's quite a discipline. It makes me think of that example in the material about Rabbi Zera fasting for 40 days.
Right, to deliberately forget his prior learning, the Babylonian Talmud, so he could be open, truly empty, to receive the insights of the Torah of the land of Israel.
Wow. That's serious emptying.
It really underscores the principle, doesn't it? Clearing out the old to make space. But we see it in less extreme ways, too.
How is so?
Think about problem solving. You wrestle with something, you think and think, use all your logic, and nothing. You hit a wall.
Yeah, happens all the time.
Then maybe you step away, take a walk, shower, just let your mind go quiet. And suddenly, when you're not trying so hard, when you've reached that kind of deep mental stillness, Damama mashaftit, the answer or the root of it just appears.
Shower insight.
Yeah.
Middle of the night idea.
Exactly. It emerges from that quieted, emptied space. The material even links this to sleep.
How does sleep fit in?
Well, sleep is our natural daily process of releasing the flood of daytime external thoughts. It creates a state of mental emptiness, of renewal.
So we wake up with a sort of clean slate.
That's the idea. It allows for receiving what the source calls new consciousness, mochin chadashim, in the morning. It mentions some scholars who would consciously start their learning fresh each day.
Not just picking up where they left off.
Right. Deliberately tapping into that refreshed post-sleep state, that natural void, as a source.
Okay, but there's a really important caveat here, isn't there? A warning. You can't just empty your mind into nothingness carelessly.
Absolutely crucial point, yes. The material is very clear. There's a prerequisite, a non-negotiable one, really, for accessing ayin safely.
And that is?
You have to build this practice on a solid foundation of being and faith. Halal v'eternal. The sources mention these concepts were foundational, discussed before.
Okay, being and faith. Why is that foundation so critical? What's the danger of creating this void without it?
Well, the danger presented is quite stark. Without that anchor of being and faith, the emptiness, the ayin, can become, well, negative, problematic.
How so?
The material uses an image from the sages, a pit that has no water, which represents the lack of wisdom or being, but it does have snakes and scorpions.
Yikes.
So without the right internal foundation, that empty space doesn't fill with wisdom. It can become fertile ground for negative thoughts, for anxieties, distractions, connecting to roots of lack or deficiency. Rambam is even brought in, linking an empty heart lacking wisdom or being to being susceptible to negativity.
So emptiness for its own sake isn't the goal. It's emptiness established on something solid.
Exactly. That's the core insight. The sequence presented is very specific. First, you work on establishing and strengthening your connection to being and faith. Then, with that in place, you engage in the practice of emptying the mind, creating ayin. And from that ayin, which is now anchored and built upon being, you can safely receive the flow of wisdom.
It's a structured process. Being first, then ayin built on being.
Yes. Very important distinction.
Okay, so we've talked about the sources, how to potentially access the deeper one through this founded emptiness. Now, what about the very first moment? The instant a thought from that internal place starts to surface. What does that feel like?
Right. This is a really subtle but vital stage the sources describe. They point out that wisdom itself, Chakama, is sometimes conceptually linked to ayin, or seen as a point.
Okay.
As opposed to
bina, understanding, which is seen as an expansion and development, giving it breadth and depth. Wisdom, in its initial arising, is like a dimensionless point.
So the first emergence is like potential, undefined.
Exactly. The sources call this initial stage a thought-based state of being.
A thought-based state of being. Okay, unpack that.
It means it's not yet a fully formed thought you can articulate. It doesn't have, as the material puts it, length and width or depth yet. It's simply the sense of the thought's existence. You feel its presence before you can define it.
Okay, give me an example. Well, the classic one is having something on the tip of my tongue.
Ah, yes. You absolutely know. You know it. You feel it right there.
You feel its being, its presence, but the word itself, the articulation, isn't there yet. Or when you're working on something complex and you get that flash of insight, I think I've got it. But if someone asks you to explain it right then,
you can't. You just know the core idea is there, but the details aren't filled in.
That's precisely it. You're experiencing the existence, the being of the thought seed, before it's fully sprouted into something explainable.
And the sources say recognizing this stage is important, not just jumping to define it.
Crucial. Skipping this initial subtle awareness of the thought's mere being means you're missing its root, its foundation.
So when you get that faint feeling, that thought-based state of being, what should you do? How do you work with it?
The guidance is clear. Recognize it, trust it, and patiently sit with it.
Patience.
Trust. Yes, trust that inner sense that something is there, even if it's fuzzy. The analogy used is like trusting a dog barking in the distance. You trust the barking signifies something is present, even if you can't see what it is yet. If this feeling arises from that deep internal place, rooted in being, it's not just random noise or imagination. It's the signal of something emerging.
So the instinct might be to immediately try and grab it, define it, force it out.
Yeah.
But that's not the recommended approach.
No. The sources contrast two ways. There's the external approach, poking at it mentally, trying to force it into clarity, like poking cold embers trying to get a flame.
Right. Which often just makes it disappear.
Exactly. The internal recommended approach is different. It's recognizing the thought's existence as a tiny seed planted deep inside, and then giving it the time and space it needs to emerge naturally.
Like waiting for an actual seed in the ground to sprout. You can't rush it.
Precisely. Patience and trust are key.
And what's the benefit of cultivating this patience, of nurturing that initial thought-based state of being?
The sources explain that by focusing on and nurturing this initial stage, you're actually building a stronger, more stable foundation for the thought when it does become fully articulated.
How so?
It makes the final thought feel more substantial, more real, like it has its own reality, or its own being, havaya, rather than just being a fleeting idea that pops in and out.
So it gives the thought more weight, more solidity.
Yes, exactly. It's like building the thought from its deepest internal root upwards, making it intrinsically stronger and more connected to its source.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. Let's try and quickly recap the core ideas from this deep dive into the source material.
Sounds good.
We started with a distinction between external thoughts, basically reactions to our environment, and those much deeper internal thoughts.
Right, the ones originating from within, sometimes linked to that idea of Ruach HaKodesh.
Then we looked at how to potentially access that deeper source through creating this ain, this necessary emptiness or hollow space in the mind.
But with the crucial caveat that emptiness must be built on a solid foundation of inner being and faith to be safe and productive.
Absolutely critical. Without that, the emptiness can be problematic.
Yeah.
And finally, we explored that very first subtle emergence of an internal thought, not as a full idea, but as a thought-based state of being.
That initial sense of its existence, like something on the tip of your tongue.
And the key takeaway there is that recognizing, trusting, and patiently nurturing that initial stage is vital.
Yes, it's how you cultivate thoughts that have real substance, real being, rather than just being fleeting notions.
It really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? From actively chasing thoughts to creating the inner conditions for them to emerge and then carefully tending to their first subtle signs.
It's a much more internal, patient process.
So maybe a final thought for you to consider. Perhaps the deepest, most meaningful thoughts we have aren't the loud ones, but the ones we first feel the presence of way before we can articulate them. The ones residing in that quiet, internal space, accessed through stillness and grounded in our own sense of being.
What might you discover if you started paying closer attention to those quiet stirrings, trusting that initial sense that something profound is beginning to emerge from within?